Some people in our neighborhood like to joke that Karen didn't just live here, she ruled here. The sidewalks, the lawns, the parking spots, even the way people close their mailboxes seemed to fall under her watchful authority. Clipboard in hand, sharp eyes scanning for violations, she walked around like the entire block was her personal kingdom. Most of us had learned to ignore her lectures and keep our distance. After all, what was the worst she could do? Complain about trash bins or send another passive-aggressive HOA notice? But one morning, Karen decided someone had crossed a line that only she believed existed. And the person she chose to confront wasn't a neighbor, a landscaper, or a delivery driver. It was our new mailman. What happened next turned a quiet suburban street into the center of a federal investigation. In a moment of rage, Karen grabbed a baseball bat and attacked a man whose job was simply delivering letters. The strike lasted seconds, but the consequences would follow her for years. Because Karen believed she was enforcing the HOA authority. What she didn't realize was that she had just committed a federal crime. If you drove through our neighborhood for the first time, you'd probably think it was the definition of peaceful suburban life. Clean sidewalks, trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes in slow circles before dinner. On the surface, everything looked calm. But anyone who actually lived here knew there was one person who treated the place less like a neighborhood and more like a personal kingdom. Karen. Officially, she was just the president of the HOA. Unofficially, she acted like the mayor, the police chief, and the neighborhood judge, all rolled into one. Every morning, she'd patrol the streets with that famous clipboard tucked under her arm, scanning for violations like a detective hunting clues. Grass half an inch too long, she'd notice. Trash bin out 10 minutes past pickup, expect a warning letter. One neighbor swore Karen once measured the height of his hedge with a ruler. People mostly laughed about it, the way communities laugh about the one person who takes things way too seriously. She'd already argued with dog walkers, landscapers, and at least 3 delivery drivers. Karen always believed she was protecting standards. Then, one Monday morning, our new mailman showed up. Andrew was young, polite, fresh out of training, the kind of guy who still greeted everyone with a friendly wave. What he didn't know was that his route had just crossed Karen's territory. At first, Andrew didn't think much of Karen. Every route had someone who watched deliveries a little too closely, someone who liked to ask questions about packages or complain when letters arrived late. It was part of the job, but within a few days, Andrew began noticing something that felt different. Karen wasn't just watching. She was studying him. Neighbors started seeing her appear at the same time Andrew's mail truck rolled down the street. Sometimes she stood on the sidewalk with that clipboard pressed against her chest, staring as he sorted envelopes. Other times, she paced slowly near the truck, glancing inside the open trays like she was searching for evidence of some hidden crime. One afternoon, a neighbor joked that Karen looked like she was timing his route with a stopwatch. Then things escalated. As Andrew stepped out of his truck one day with a stack of letters, Karen walked straight up to him, blocking his path with calm confidence. "From now on," she said, tapping her clipboard, "all incoming mail needs to be reviewed by the HOA first. Community safety protocol." Andrew blinked, certain he had misunderstood. He explained politely that mail was private property protected by federal law. No one, not even an HOA, had the right to inspect it. Karen's smile slowly faded. Her voice turned colder. "If you don't cooperate," she warned quietly, "you won't be delivering mail here much longer." 3 days passed, and for a moment it seemed like the tension might simply fade away. That morning looked like every other quiet morning on our street. The sun was out, sprinklers ticked softly across green lawns, and somewhere down the block, a dog barked lazily at passing cars. Andrew's mail truck rolled in right on schedule, a familiar sound of its engine blending into the calm rhythm of the neighborhood. He stepped out with a bundle of letters tucked under his arm, moving from mailbox to mailbox like he always did. Then Karen appeared. She stepped out from behind a tall hedge near the corner house, arms stiff at her sides, sunglasses hiding her eyes. She walked straight toward Andrew and planted herself directly in his path. "And over the mail," she said flatly. Andrew sighed quietly, already sensing where this was heading. He explained again patiently that interfering with the mail was a federal offense. The letters had to go directly to the residents. That was the law. Karen didn't move. Her hands were still hidden behind her back. "I'll ask you one more time," she said slowly. Andrew shook his head. That was the moment everything snapped. In a single motion, Karen pulled a metal baseball bat from behind her and swung. The crack of metal against Andrew's jaw echoed across the street. Letters exploded from his hands, scattering across the pavement like confetti. Andrew collapsed hard onto the ground as Karen raised the bat again, swinging wildly. The screams from nearby houses came seconds later as neighbors rushed outside toward the chaos unfolding in the street. The quiet street erupted into motion. Front doors flew open as neighbors ran toward the sound of the impact and the shouting that followed. By the time the first few people reached the scene, Andrew was on the pavement, dazed and bleeding, struggling to push himself up while scattered letters slid across the asphalt. Karen lifted the bat again. But before she could swing, Derek from 2 houses down lunged forward and tackled her from behind. The bat clattered across the street as others rushed in, pulling Andrew away while Karen fought wildly, kicking and shouting as if she were the one being attacked. Someone knelt beside Andrew, pressing a towel against his jaw while another neighbor frantically dialed 911. Andrew tried to speak, but the words came out broken and faint, his face already swelling as the shock settled in. Karen, meanwhile, kept yelling about rules, about protecting the neighborhood, about enforcing the HOA authority. To her, this was still some kind of twisted duty. Sirens cut through the tension minutes later as police cars rolled onto the block, lights flashing across the quiet houses. Paramedics quickly loaded Andrew into the ambulance while officers tried to calm the chaotic scene. Karen stood nearby, breathing heavily, insisting she had done nothing wrong. But the moment one officer mentioned the words federal employee, something in her expression finally shifted. For the next few days, the neighborhood felt strangely quiet. People spoke in low voices when they passed each other on the sidewalks, replaying the moment over and over. Andrew was still in the hospital recovering, and the story had already begun spreading beyond our block. What many of us didn't realize yet was that the situation had moved far beyond a neighborhood dispute. Because Andrew wasn't just any worker. He was a federal employee. Early one morning, just after sunrise, several dark vehicles rolled slowly into the neighborhood. Men in plain jackets stepped out, followed by uniformed officers, postal inspectors, federal investigators, even a couple of agents who quietly introduced themselves as part of a federal task force. They walked straight up Karen's driveway. Neighbors watched from their windows and porches as the door opened and Karen stepped outside, clearly confused by the sudden attention. Within seconds, voices were raised. Karen started arguing loudly, insisting she had every right to control male activity within the HOA. But the agents weren't there to debate neighborhood policies. They calmly explained the charges: assaulting a federal postal worker, obstructing the delivery of U.S. mail, and interfering with a protected federal service. The words landed heavier than anything said before. Handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists as cameras and phones quietly appeared from every driveway. The woman who once ruled the block with a clipboard was now standing in the center of a federal investigation, and the entire neighborhood was watching it happen. The courtroom was packed the day Karen's case was finally heard. What had started as a neighborhood incident had turned into something much larger, and everyone seemed to understand that the outcome would send a clear message. Karen sat at the defense table, stiff and visibly frustrated, still convinced she had simply been protecting her community. When the judge asked for her explanation, Karen didn't hesitate. She spoke about HOA responsibilities, about keeping the neighborhood safe, about believing the mailman had ignored her authority. To her, it sounded reasonable, but inside that courtroom, her words carried far less weight than she expected. Andrew was called to testify soon after. His voice was calm, but the injuries he described told a far harsher story. The blow to his jaw, the hospital stay, and the fear he felt in those few violent seconds while he was simply trying to do his job. Neighbors followed one by one, describing exactly what they saw that morning. The bat, the strike, the chaos. By the time the testimonies ended, the room had grown quiet. The judge listened patiently, then delivered the ruling with blunt clarity. Assaulting a federal postal worker, interfering with the delivery of U.S. mail, and causing serious bodily harm carried severe consequences. Karen was sentenced to years in federal prison along with heavy financial penalties. Her HOA leadership was immediately stripped away. For the first time, the woman who once controlled the neighborhood had no authority left at all. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly returned to the calm routine it had always known. The police cars disappeared, the whispers faded, and the sidewalks once again filled with the ordinary sounds of daily life. But one thing had clearly changed. Karen was gone. Without her daily patrols and clipboard inspections, the street felt noticeably quieter. Trash bins stayed out a little longer, lawns grew a little wilder, And for the first time in years, nobody seemed worried about someone measuring their hedges. A month later, Andrew finally returned to his route. The moment his mail truck rolled down the street, several neighbors stepped outside to greet him. People thanked him, shook his hand, and quietly apologized for what had happened. Through it all, Andrew stayed the same polite, steady, doing the job he'd always come to do. Looking back, it's almost ironic. Karen spent years trying to control everyone else's behavior. But in the end, the one thing she couldn't control was the law. So what do you think? Did Karen get the punishment she deserved? Let me know your thoughts below.